Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to our coaches chat, our New York Roadrunner coaches chat today. Say with me, we have Brent Smith, a physical therapist from our partners, Hospital for Special Surgery. So today we are going to dive into hips, but before I want to set the scene. Some of our runners this last weekend took part in our first of two training series. It was the TCS New York City Marathon training series, the 12-miler in Central Park. So runners took on 2 laps of the park. And then this weekend, we actually have our New York Roadrunners Greta's Great Gallop 10K. So again, hitting the loop in Central Park for another 10K race. And looking further into the calendar, we also have our New Balance 5th Ave Mile. So a lot of miles coming up, a lot of races happening. But we want to talk about hips, and as we go through our conversation, we also want you to know to submit your questions. Let us know where you're watching from. If you have any questions about hips, our races, submit them, let us know. But we're going to start with, what kind of role do our hips play? We always talk about running being on your feet, on your legs, how do your hamstrings feel, your quads, your ankles, but everyone leaves out the hips. So what's so important about our hips when it comes to running?
Yeah, and it's tough that when we leave that out, the hips are the locomotion, right? All of the movement of our legs is created by the hips.
Okay.
So anything else that happens below the hips is really in reaction to the hips.
Very interesting. So when we talk about someone getting their knees up when they're running uphill, that starts from the hips.
Yeah, it's starting from those hip flexors, and we could add in even more to say, even above the hips, the arms, it takes more than just the knee to get it up. But the main thing would be, yes, that hip. That hip is initiating the forward motion of the leg, and everything else responds to that.
Got it. And the same thing, I guess you could say, if people are twisting at the hip, maybe we'll slow them down?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's going to be some natural hip anyway, since as human beings, we move in a reciprocal pattern.
Yep.
But any excessive motion, sure, are going to slow you down. You're going to waste energy, right? It might be a compensation for lack of mobility in the hip even.
Okay. So let's talk about that, compensating for something that might be going wrong in the hips. What are some typical hip injuries that marathoners might be experiencing as they're training and ramping up miles?
Sure. I would think the 2 big ones that would come to mind would maybe be overuse of the hip flexors, so that kind of cramping in the front of the hips, that ITB syndrome that kicks in, which is normally beside the knee, but even up higher, like the bursitis, myself as well. Those would be the 2 main areas I would think about. And then sometimes hamstring injuries or soreness, overuse injuries.
So even hamstrings could be associated with weak hips.
Yeah. I mean, if you start to talk about anatomical chains, meaning when we look at weakness, right, it can affect above and below. So if we're looking at the hip, and if there's an imbalance or weakness, it can affect the knee, the ankle, it can go up into the pelvis, the spine.
Interesting. So even if we are experiencing knee pain, it may not be the knee.
Right.
It could be somewhere else.
It could be coming from the hip, or it could be coming from the ankle. That's the fun
love
of PT.
Running. We love it. But that's something that you'd be able to diagnose, right?
Yeah, sure, of course.
At
a runner could
appointment
come in, see a PT. They'd give them a thorough examination.
Okay.
Find where maybe those imbalances are, the weaknesses, maybe areas where muscles are just inactive and not firing, and start to work on that.
Got it. And warming up would help hips get ready for activation and firing them up, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big proponent for dynamic warm-ups. Yeah.
Yes,
absolutely.
love that. But you just said weakness in the hip. So what are some things that runners can do to strengthen their hips?
Sure,
or
lots
maybe
of
help
things.
Strengthen other parts that are complemented by the hips?
Yeah. I mean, the first one that we always talk about, from every talk, I think we talk about the glutes, right? So we all forget the glutes. We talk about the glutes being the core. The glutes is really part of that locomotion that really gets us going. So that's the first one that a lot of people forget about. But when you're talking about strengthening the hips, it's about strengthening in all planes. So forward with the hip flexors, back with the glutes and the hamstrings, and then you can't forget to go to the side, and even going in this way, right? So your adductors and your abductors.
So let's start with the first body part you talked about, glutes.
Yeah,
what
glutes.
kind of movement could someone do?
Sure, basic one would be bridges, single leg bridges, double leg bridges. Even lunges will help.
Lunges are great.
Yeah.
And then for side to side, because running is forward motion.
Right.
So what's a side to side thing that we're maybe not used to doing?
Yeah, I mean, basic one that a lot of people probably know is lying on your side with the knees bent and opening the knees, so like a clamshell.
Ooh,
or when they lay on their side and the legs straight, lifted up off the ground. Yeah, that'll get the abduction, and then vice versa. If you're on your side and lifting that bottom leg off the ground, that's getting those inside
Okay.
muscles.
So they don't need a ton of equipment to start strengthening.
No,
Okay.
they really don't. I mean, TheraBands are always great.
Yep.
Body weight resistance is always great.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how long should these movements do? If someone's running Greta's Great Gallop 10K this weekend, they go home, should they be strength training for an hour after? Should they be doing this for 5 minutes?
Yeah,
What's
sure. Good question.
a general?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the routine they're following. But if you're in the middle, like happy marathon training season, everybody, right? If we're in the middle of training season,
Yep.
we're doing lighter weights, maybe
Okay.
more repetitions. We're not really lifting heavy, so it's probably a shorter workout.
Okay.
At least lighter weights. I think an hour is too much. If you work
Yep.
out to the point that you're so sore that it affects your running gait, you're pushing too hard. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, and I think that's where sometimes runners get lost is, I don't have dumbbells, I don't have, a barbell to do lunges, and you don't.
You don't.
don't.
You don't need it.
A pair of resistance bands will go a long way.
Well, and it's a good time that somebody could go to a personal trainer. They could go to a PT, even if it's just one appointment, to get on a good program that they
Yep.
can follow at home. They can advise them in some of the equipment to get for home. None
Yep.
of it's expensive. None of it doesn't have to be heavy, right? It doesn't take up much room. So it's always a good way for people to approach it.
I love that. And I think that's having the ability to do something at home eliminates excuses,
100%.
which is
It's
always
staring at you in the corner all
yeah,
the
you
time.
see your bands on the floor. I like to call them like my TV activities. When I'm chilling
Yeah.
out for the end of the day, you do some clamshells, you'll
Yeah.
do some core work maybe,
Yeah.
just to tighten it all up.
Yeah, and some of it for me becomes my dynamic warm up before I run. This morning before I ran, I had my whole program I ran. It's probably
Yep.
10, 15 minutes max.
Okay.
And that was my warm up and strengthening to then go out and do my run.
That's great. And so some other things that you can do as part of, so let's say you do glutes, you do the side. What about, we talked earlier about bringing strides up. So when you're running uphill, is there anything that runners can do to help strengthen that hip flexor and maybe warm that up?
Yeah, I mean, the first one I can think of is, lunges into a dynamic step out is going to get you
Okay.
in. So stepping back into a lunge, and
Yep.
then stepping it through and holding that
Okay.
leg up to hold the balance.
Yep.
If you want to talk about true strengthening, you could think of attaching that TheraBand to the ankle so that when you lift it up,
Slight resistance.
slight resistance.
Okay.
Yeah.
But beginners, just a lunge into a sprinter stance
beginner
would
probably
be.
doesn't even need resistance because just holding that balance on
Yeah.
the leg is going to really test them.
And balance is definitely something we all love. We love balance.
It's fundamental for running.
Yeah, absolutely. But before we keep going, I definitely want to open up the floor for any shout outs, for any questions that we may be getting from runners. All right. And what is our first question we're getting?
Otto is asking, what are some good hip stretches that I can do?
Very broad question.
Yeah.
There's tons of great stretches. Yeah. I mean, the fundamental would be thinking of all the different directions and planes I talked about for strengthening. You need to do the same thing for stretching, so getting each way. So even as simple as laying on your back and your knees to your chest, right? A good figure four stretch, if you know that one, crossing the ankle over the knee, pulling it in. Stepping the leg out into a side lunge to get the inside of the leg. Those are some pretty good ones. And then the good old basic lunge to get those hip flexors that are probably too tight on all of us.
Yeah, one of my favorite movements is actually like a low lunge from yoga.
Sure.
I love that. Really gets a deep stretch in there.
Yeah.
For sure.
Absolutely.
And all right, let's go to our second question we may have.
And now Lynn is asking, what is the best exercise for hip impingement?
That's a tough one.
Okay.
In terms of best, when we start to get into specific diagnoses, that's when we need to get our hands on somebody and see what's really going on there. Because it's going to be different for each person based on what they're experiencing, what they're finding. So it really depends on where are you feeling that pain and that restriction.
Yeah. Because impingement could mean anywhere in the hip.
Well, it's usually in the front.
Okay.
So some of those hip flexion stretches might
Okay.
help. But to give a broad one for that is difficult. Just
All
because
right.
it's going to be different.
So it sounds like, Lynn, maybe we need to have you stop by HSS and see
or
Brent.
send a message, with your symptoms and stuff on the live chat, and I'll look at it and see if I can dig deeper after the fact.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to our next question.
And now Katrina is asking, do you have any tips for someone who's trying to recover from a hip labrum tear and now getting back into running?
Yeah, take it slow. Number one, right? So for us as runners, we go, we push, right? And we usually do it to our own detriment. So hopefully, if you're recovering for this, you're working with a physical therapist and then a personal trainer. So go by the program they tell you.
Yep.
Obviously, you know this, even better than I do, adding in those miles, right? Don't go right back to where you were before. We're going to have to start with maybe just 2-3 minute run at the most before you even start to think about miles.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's a run-walk combination is always great to come back. It's good for us as a coach to see how you're progressing. If you're hurting at 2 minutes, we're clearly not ready to go for some miles. But for you also, if we do have regression, you can catch it quickly.
Sure, absolutely. And I think one of the most important things you just said is that taking that moment of introspection. If there's pain, so you have to listen to your body.
Yeah.
Anytime, we say the pain word all the time. If there's pain, stop.
Yes.
Don't push through pain.
Yeah, and I think as runners, we're always guilty. Well, I know, I am.
I'm totally guilty, yeah.
Of saying, it's not pain, I'm sore. And we need to have a distinction between I'm sore because I had a hard workout or I'm in pain because I'm fighting an injury.
Right.
And like you said, it's a lot of introspective and making sure that you recognize what your symptoms are.
Yeah, and I think one of the best ways to think about that when you're talking about soreness versus pain is this what I'm feeling altering my gait? The minute it starts to alter your gait, pull back or stop. Yeah. That's pain.
Yeah, and that's when real issues, tears, bad long-term problems happen. I always say it's better to take a week off and recover versus push it, get injured, and now we have to take 6 weeks off.
100%.
Nobody wants to do that, especially now as we are less than 100 days from marathon. So,
close.
Yeah. And let's go to our next question.
So Kinga is asking, what are the 3 most important glute exercises for runners?
Important glute ones. Bridging, like we talked about, number one. So starting with the bilateral legs, like both feet on the ground and bridging up, making sure those glutes are firing, then switching over to the single leg glute. And then really lunges. Those would be my top 3. What are your thoughts?
I love glute bridges. I love single leg glute bridges are still a challenge to me. If you're focusing in 10, you are smoked after 10 per side. And lunges as well. I think lunges are great. I love reverse lunges because it does a little bit of a counteract of all the forward motion we're doing. Yep. So at group training, I'm always making them do reverse lunges. Yep. But I love that because it just changes up what your body is used to doing. Yep.
And I think for anybody who really wants to go further with it and really push themselves, that good old exercise of putting your back on a weight bench, put the weighted bar across, and it's a bridge, but it's a weighted bridge, and that'll really take it further.
That's bringing me back to cross-country nightmare days. But we appreciate everyone's questions about hips. We're actually going to move on to what I really love, which is fact and fiction. So what are some of these urban legends, old wives' tales that you hear and we don't really know if they're true? So let's dive into the first one, which is my favorite because my older relatives always tell me this. Doesn't running damage your knees?
Fiction.
Fiction.
And the nice thing is we have research coming out that's showing this is fiction. Now, we have to state any repetitive activity, whether it's sport, your job, whatever it is, of course, can cause damage to your body, right? Course. But running, if we're happy and healthy with it, no. Research is saying fiction.
Fiction. Yeah. Running will not damage your knees. Yeah. So we touched upon this one a little earlier, but when you're strength training, you need to be at a gym and you need weights.
Fiction.
There we go.
You need to be on a good program that you understand.
Yep.
But it doesn't have to be at a gym with weights.
Don't need barbells. We don't need any of that.
No.
Next one. Should you stretch before a run?
I say absolutely not. Static stretching.
Yes.
You should do dynamic warm-up, right, which involves stretching but movement through the stretch. But a true static stretch holding for 20 to 30 seconds, unless you have a reason why there's something specific that you're having to work on, no, don't do it.
Got it. So we're talking dynamic movements like high knees, butt kicks, maybe rolling the hips around a little bit.
Yeah, and even that lunge into the step up like we talked about, but don't hold that lunge.
Right.
Get out of it within a second or two.
Okay.
Yeah.
Some
Getting
ankle
the blood
circles. Yes.
flowing.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Maybe a few squats just to get
Absolutely,
the blood flowing.
Please do squats.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So no static stretching before, but a little dynamic stretching, warm up movements. Yeah. All right. So this is my favorite because this is just my favorite. I'll start there. runners don't need strong upper bodies.
Fiction.
Fiction.
We don't run with our arms like this.
Yep.
It's part of the motion. This is what helps drive us, especially up a hill. Now, it doesn't mean we need to be in the gym developing huge, large biceps,
No.
but they need to be strong.
Yeah. So would you say if we're not doing bicep curls, maybe we're doing planks?
Absolutely. And you could do a bicep curl, but
Okay.
you don't need to be lifting heavy weights, whatever
Right.
that means for each individual.
Right. Okay.
But yeah.
Perfect. And then another one, we kind of touched upon this with injuries. Taking a few days off will hurt your fitness.
Fiction.
Fiction. Why is it
Not
fiction?
taking a few days off was probably going to do worse for your fitness. Well, when our body recovers and heals is when we take those days off, when we're sleeping, right? And especially when we have those moments where something's going on, a potential overuse injury, you have to take those days off for the body to decrease that inflammation and repair itself.
So on our rest days, are our muscles healing? Are they growing, shrinking? Like, what's going on with them?
Yeah, I mean, the shrinking aspect would be maybe if you have an inflammatory response going on, maybe it's shrinking, but truly it's rebuilding, it's repairing all those micro tears that occur when we're working out, when we're running. So it is repairing itself, which is why rest is important, nutrition is important, and don't allowing yourself to add in any other physical activity on those true days off.
Yes. So don't, on your rest day, run easy. Just
rest.
Just rest. Don't do more than you have to. Great. So we're going to kick it out again to some shout outs and some questions that we may have from runners. All right. What is our first question we have?
So Jim is asking, the arch on my foot has started to hurt when walking, but not while running. Any tips?
I always love these questions because it's almost impossible, to diagnose and give it advice over this format. But, I mean, as I always say, the first advice would be to go see somebody. I mean, there's plenty of different things that could be going on in the foot. Mm-hmm. There's no way to definitively say what it is right now. Let's talk about those rest days.
Yep.
If it's... The question would be, okay, it's not happening during running, it's happening during walking, but then you need to think for yourself, well, is it actually happening after running? So I'm just sore the next day when I'm not running, I'm just walking. So you kind of have to piece that out. It's hard to say definitively what to do. Good proper support in your shoes. I mean, I love those recovery, I always butcher the name, UFOs, right?
Yeah.
I'm now an addict of those when I'm home because it gives you that support and unloads all that soft tissue.
And I think that's tough because when we get questions like that at group training, the first question I ask is, are you walking 20 city blocks in dress shoes? Are you wearing sneakers? Are you wearing flip-flops? And
great point.
I think shoe style can also be maybe a problem or it could add to injury, something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's important to think about not just what are the shoes we're running in, but like you just stated, those daily shoes that we're wearing more than our running shoes.
Yeah, because as people that commute in New York City, we are walking a lot from the train, up the stairs, on the subway, so we have to think about what kind of shoes we're going to be in.
Good one for the foot that I'll just throw out, that was a frozen water bottle. In the freezer, you pull it out, put it underneath your foot, and roll it out and see if that does anything for you.
Yeah. I hate ice baths. I'm like vehemently against them because it's so cold. Yeah. But they are so good for you. Yeah, and ice would definitely help. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's go to our second question.
Michael is saying, I'm running the 5th Ave Mile and the NYC Marathon. What's the best way to approach that race?
Oh, the Fifth Avenue. Well, I mean, have fun with the Fifth Avenue. We were just talking about, we're split here between people that hate it and people that love it. The first thing I would say is remember that almost the first half of the Fifth Avenue 1 mile is almost uphill.
It's
very almost slight. The first half. So don't push too hard on that first half and then just open the gates once you hit that downhill.
Yes.
And if you're running the marathon, it's good preparation because you run that route in the marathon, and that's, what is that, mile 22, 23, right about that on that uphill. It's rough. Maybe a little bit earlier, but it's tough.
Yeah, I think if Michael is talking about, do I race that and then do my long run? Do I do my long run and then finish with a 1 mile sprint? I would advise not to sprint a mile after you've run 19. But really look at your week. Look at how you are as a runner. If you're able to do that run one day and your long run on the other day, that way you can kind of see what you're made of the next day or before a long run. But we were talking about,
Yeah.
do you incorporate it before or after a long run? And I immediately said, no, you do it on 2 separate days. You don't push it.
Yeah.
So,
And that race does run very rapidly. So you
Yes.
could put it in the middle of your long run and basically
Right.
get there right when you start, keep going.
take
and then,
off and then just loop back into Central Park.
Exactly.
Yeah. Great. So let's go to our next question.
Scott is saying, I'm experiencing hip adductor pain. How long does this usually last for?
Another very great, broad question. Let's put it this way. If you're experiencing pain that isn't going away after multiple days, even weeks, or if you're experiencing pain that's getting worse, that's the cue that there's something going on and you need to go see a doctor, a physical therapist, and get assessed for that. If it's, I say going on for that long because if it's just soreness, 2 to 3 days,
Yeah,
it
you
should
should
be
be fine.
done.
Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, if it's going on for more than 3 days, I would say that something else is going on.
Yeah.
And you need to either go see a doctor,
Yeah.
change your workouts the next few days,
Yeah.
see if it is excessive soreness.
Yeah.
I do know some people get sore, was it delayed onset?
Delayed onset
syndrome?
muscle syndrome,
Yeah,
yeah.
where they get tired maybe 2 days after
Yeah,
a
yeah.
workout. So I would just be mindful of what you did when you first started feeling the pain, and then, like you said, if it's after 3 days, go get it checked out.
Yeah, and if this
sure.
is new pain, this is the first time you're feeling that pain, kind of like what we were discussing earlier. This is that moment to pull back a little bit.
Yeah.
Make sure it's not going to get any worse. Take days off. It's okay, and then slowly start to reintroduce running.
Yeah. Especially if your race is the New York City Marathon, if it's later in the year, if it's the Ted Corbett 15K, if your goal race is further out,
Yeah.
take the time now to pull back. If you're looking for an earlier marathon, that's when I would say go to a PT right away.
Yeah,
And
those of
just-
us that are doing Berlin and Chicago, right? It's
Yeah,
right around the
exactly.
corner.
So
So
don't waste time. Go see
Yeah.
a PT, get it professionally looked at, so that way you can make adjustments in the last month of your
yeah,
training.
yeah.
Yeah. I think we have another question.
Then we have a shout out from Antonio saying, great tips, Team HSS.
Thank you. Glad they helped.
We love HSS.
And then we have one more question from Scott saying, I think I have a heel spur. Can this become PF?
I'm assuming he means plantar fasciitis. Yes. Could it become? It's yes and no. It's separate, but having the heel spur could change how you're walking, how you're running, which could put different forces on the foot, which could obviously then turn into plantar fasciitis.
Yep.
If it's a heel spur, I'm assuming he's meaning behind, his ankle, kind of where the Achilles attaches.
Yep.
If it's underneath the heel, then yeah, that could actually be plantar fasciitis.
Okay, so it sounds like that may not be the cause of the problem. It could be an impairment somewhere else, and now it's presenting down there.
Right, potentially,
or-
unless he's actually been diagnosed with a heel
Right,
spur, and he's
okay.
worried that, by having that heel spur, I'm walking differently. Could this then cause plantar fasciitis? Right, anytime we have compensations, we could feel pain and discomfort elsewhere in our body. I wouldn't overly worry about it, but, he needs to be working with somebody about how to work through the potential pain he's feeling from the heel spur
Yeah.
to make sure he's not overly compensating.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of these questions we've gotten are very broad.
Yeah,
And
which is
without,
great.
yeah, great, because we can help a lot of people.
Yeah.
But also for specific diagnosis, you need to see someone, how they're walking, how
Absolutely.
they're moving. The same thing when we look at runners during group training. We see how they're moving. They're tight up here. We say, okay, relax the arms. If they just said, I have shoulder tension, I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know why that. So that's why it's always important to, when you have specific questions, ask us, but then also follow up and see someone at HSS.
Yeah,
to
we
get-
have so many people who
Yeah.
specialize in running at HSS. It'd be so easy for them to get in.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and that's what we need.
Yeah.
And I think that was our last question.
Yeah, lastly, we have one more shout out from Angela saying, thank you for all these talks.
Oh, good. You're welcome, Angela. We appreciate you tuning in. And thank you again, Brent, for being here. And want to thank our partners, Hospital for Special Surgery, for allowing Brent to come down, do a little bit of chatting with us about hips, proving what's fact, what's fiction, which I really love. And we'll be back in a few weeks with some more of these tips. So have a great day. And if you're running this weekend, good luck, and we'll see you at the start line.